Back to the politics, because Nadine Dorries is not someone who has ever shied away from controversy as a politician. She's written a new book about the downfall of the Conservative Party, which doesn't flinch from apportioning blame to senior Conservatives, with the exception, of course, of her former boss, Boris Johnson. I spoke to her about that, of course. But before the interview, I asked if she would be comfortable talking to me about something else. She was abused when she was 9 years old by a Church of England vicar. Now, she wasn't comfortable talking about it. She would have probably preferred to talk about anything else in the world, but she did decide to speak to me about it despite that, because she's angry, she's furious even, about what she sees as the architecture of suppression in the church that is still shutting down victims of abuse. It was an intense interview. It made a big impression on me. I want to play you it now, a warning that it does involve discussion of child abuse. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to have you here. So you've written a new book, Downfall. It's subtitled The Self-Destruction of the Conservative Party. So do you think the Conservative Party is destroyed?
Well, you know, political parties too die. They have no God-given right to exist. And the Conservative Party MPs in particular have inflicted some pretty fatal wounds upon itself in recent years. Does it deserve to die? I hope not, because I am a Conservative. Is it terminal? Is it actually terminal? I don't think we know yet, and it's not possible to tell at this moment in time, but it's in a pretty bad place, and there are a number of kind of factors that play into that. One is, of course, that you now have reform. You have MPs in Westminster, and you have Nigel Farage, who is filling the political stage. And I do say the reason why he's filling it is because Boris Johnson has exited that stage, and reform are a very serious threat now.
So do you think Nigel Farage is like the new Boris Johnson then?
No, not at all. You know, I always say that one of the reasons why Boris Johnson got an 80-seat majority was because he literally straddled the policy spectrum. He had net zero, he had levelling up at the same time as he had Brexit and other policies, and HS2 and other visionary infrastructure type policies. So that's the reason why he did so well, because he spoke to lots of voter groups and people across the social divide as well. Whereas reform is right of centre and very narrow in its policies.
Interested to get your thoughts on the new leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. What do you make of her? Do you think she would be a good leader of the party?
Who knows, we'll wait and see. But I think Kemi has to do a number of things in order to be a good leader of the Conservative Party, because we know what's been wrong, from candidate selection to the Whip's office having numerous complaints about MPs and just covering them up when they should no longer have been allowed to stand as MPs, to the game playing and the plotting that happens in the background. And I hope that what Kemi will do moving forward is she will completely cut herself adrift from people like Dominic Cummings and Dougie Smith and Michael Gove and others. She will cut herself adrift from those people, even though they are the people who've supported and got her to where she is today, and will take the party in a new direction. And I'm hoping that she does that, and I'm kind of crossing my fingers and waiting to see that happen. But, you know, as of today, Dougie Smith, who actually was written about in this Sunday Times, even though people said he was a figment of my imagination a year ago, is still responsible for the candidates department, is still paid by CCHQ, and is still there. I'm looking forward to the day when I can say Kemi's going to make a difference, because she's going to cut herself away from all of that. I'd like to see that happen.
There is one other thing that I did want to speak to you about. And before I do, I just want to say that I really appreciate you talking to me about this, because I can imagine it must be very, very difficult. And I think you are incredibly strong and resilient for choosing to do so. Sexual abuse within the Church of England has been in the news recently. We've seen, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury resign for his handling of a case. And you have written recently about your own experiences of this when you were 9, just a little girl. You obviously don't have to go into the details of what happened, but you were abused when you were younger.
I was, yeah. And I don't like talking about it. I don't even like writing about it. But I was made so angry by the recent reports of the abuse those young boys received that it's, and I mean so angry, that the church is still covering up, it's still facilitating that degree of abuse. And, you know, the church is an institution where things happen that shouldn't, as I've written about in Downfall, as is the Conservative Party, as is the Post Office, as is various other institutions where toxic cultures develop. And what makes me really angry is when those cultures are allowed to continue despite the fact that people know about them. And what really angered me about Justin Welby is when I read that that people knew that this wasn't one person, this was many people, and a really serious level of abuse inflicted on those children, on those young boys who were children. It made me blisteringly angry. And I was a cathartic process. I wrote my 3 books through this. And it was actually a journalist who picked up and challenged me about my denials, and that's how it came out into the open. It wasn't that I willingly put it out there. A journalist kind of put 2 and 2 together.
You fictionalised it, is what
I
you
did.
mean, and then someone said, this has got to be more than fiction to you, this is more personal.
Journalist Amy Oliver said to me, she was reviewing the book and interestingly read it and said, you've put this person's name in your 3rd book, and I don't think your descriptions of abuse are fictional, and I know you've denied it as being real, but it is, isn't it? And I couldn't lie to her, it was. And so she went on this journey of finding out where he was and told me he was dead. And I didn't follow it through. I was called for a meeting with 3 bishops in the House of Lords who sat 12 foot away from me as though I was contagious, who promised me they would go away. I can still see the face on and say, we're going to look into this. This is quite a serious complaint. We're going to look into this and we will get back to you. I heard nothing back.
So they said they'd get back to you?
Nothing.
And they didn't
Stonewalled me. Yeah, stonewalled.
I found that extraordinary.
Yeah. But what I've realised over this story, these young boys, is that there's almost an architecture of suppression and shutting things down. And I realised only recently when I heard about these young boys, it's about money. It's not money. They are afraid that people will come through and make claims of compensation against the church, and they're just about protecting the coffers. And
is there a particular problem, and I know you speak about other institutions as well and institutional responsibility, but do you think there is a particular problem with the church?
Yeah, I do, because it's been well known and it's widespread. And would Justin Welby have become Archbishop if he'd addressed this problem early on in his career? If when he was told about those young boys, he'd done something, if he'd put a process in place to deal with complaints?
I need to put his side at this point over, which is Justin Welby says that he thought that the process was going on, that the police knew about it, and he believed that that process would continue. That's what he says.
Yeah, I think he has a responsibility in the church, not to think that was happening, but to know that was happening. And he didn't know, he only thought. And that shows a lack of responsibility, a lack of taking the issue seriously, a lack of due diligence on behalf of the church to ensure there are processes in place to follow those complaints through. It fails on every level. He failed on every level.
You said that you had lived with a shame about what happened, and that now you're angry, and I can sense that anger. I find it kind of heartbreaking that you have carried this shame, and I know that obviously, we're talking about their little boys, who's been, many of them now men, of course, who have shared their story, and I'm sure the tragedy is that many of them will feel shame as well.
Yeah, it ruins your life. It literally ruins your life.
Is that what you feel? You feel it's ruined your life? I
feel it's ruined my life. And I think the big sadness for me is that I never discussed it with my husband. Never. And he's gone now, and I can't discuss it with him. And I think that's the biggest sadness for me. And it's... And I still don't discuss it with my children, my daughters, who are grown women now. They know about it. And the youngest, says to me, Mum, she said to me about when I spoke to her about these young boys, she said, you need to write more about you, you need to talk about more about you. And I said, I can't, I don't like doing it. And she said, it's nothing to be ashamed of. The middle one tells me I need therapy. This one tells me I need to write about it more. So yeah, so the girls do know, but I don't discuss it. I've never discussed what happened to me, but it does. It changes you forever. And I am 67 next birthday. No, I'm 67 now, aren't I? I'm 68 next birthday. I wish I wasn't, but I am. And it has taken me all of this time to get to a point to think, can I stop feeling the shame? Can I stop feeling less of an individual? Can I stop feeling lesser than everybody else because of what happened to me that didn't happen to them? And one of the reasons why I think I can do that is because it happened to so many others as well.
Yeah, and they shouldn't feel shame. They shouldn't feel shame either.
No.
And actually, that's why thank you so much for. I can sense how you don't want to talk about this, and I get that totally. But the fact that you have spoken about it, I think will really help people. So I really appreciate you doing it. Thank you.
No, thanks, Sophie.